I'm going to now hand you over to the speaker, Mike. This is Mike. Hi, I'm speaking today. As stage host, I should tell you that you can interact with our platform, Glisser, using the URL there, glsr.live/ETL22. You need to select this session because we're running all of the stages here, and that's for the in-room Q&A. There's also a couple of polls we're going to push through. We're not collecting any data from you, so don't worry about that. Just for our own, just for some research that we wanted to do over the course of this show and collect some information. Glisser as a platform does a lot more than just Q&A and polling. It's an entire virtual and hybrid event platform, like many here, and that's what we're going to be presenting on today with this specific topic, which is have your cake and eat it. Don't drop virtual to make room for in-room. So that's the topic I've sort of come up with for today. I appreciate you've probably spent the last 3 years hearing from virtual events providers and hybrid events providers and every other name that they rebrand themselves as, and how can I make this session any different? And that's a challenge for us as speakers. But what I wanted to do today was talk about how I see virtual and hybrid events sitting in portfolios going forward, and really arguing that they still have a place. So in coming up with the title, Have Your Cake and Eat It, for those of you that aren't natural English speakers, it's a phrase, it's an idiom meaning to have two good things at once. Now, it means something different to the best of both worlds. So when we say the best of both worlds, that's often how we've described hybrid events. Hey, you can have the in-room thing and you can have the virtual thing and you can bring them together. It's the best of both worlds. When you talk about having your cake and eat it, it's slightly different than it's saying you can actually have two good things. It's not a blend between them, it's two good things. And that's really the point that I'm making today. It's that just because we are back in rooms and being in room is great, we don't necessarily need to drop virtual events entirely from our portfolios. So straight up, virtual events providers, we're not the bad guy, okay? We're not here to eat your lunch. We're not here to dominate. In fact, Glisser was an in-room audience engagement product first. We were doing that for 6 years before we were a virtual provider. So we were very much built with the in-room event in mind, and we kept that philosophy through lockdown. And as an event goer, as an event host, as somebody that previously ran a lot of events for organizations, I am a massive advocate for in-room events. I think that in-room events are perfect for networking. I'm one of those people that believes that networking doesn't really take place in virtual events. You can make connections, you can maybe chat with people that you already know, but you are not really networking. You're not getting introduced to somebody by somebody you already know and given that natural introduction that makes you become friends and gives you a topic of conversation. It doesn't really work in virtual, and I still hold that opinion despite selling a virtual platform. So in-room is better for networking. I think that in-room is better for really high-quality leads. So we've been doing Event Tech Live since day one. In fact, we launched at the first ever Event Tech Live. So our birthday is the same birthday as Event Tech Live. I think we're 8 today, along with Event Tech Live, so we've been going 8 years. So we're 8 years old, and we've tracked our leads from this event every year. And we did a couple of years during lockdown, and we still got leads. We still definitely generated leads. We still generated opportunities, and we generated business from virtual events, but we didn't generate as many high-quality leads as physical. So I'm definitely an advocate to say, you've got to run some physical events to generate the high-quality leads that naturally come from networking. And personally, I think that physical events are way more fun, right? We've got the awards after this. I think Adam's following me on the stage to talk about those. We get to meet people. We get to have fun. They're just enjoyable. There's a reason we come back to these things. There's a reason my entire team is here tomorrow, is because we can create so much energy from attending awards. So, yeah, we are not the bad guy. We're actually really big advocates for in-room events, and we are really glad that they're back and that they're coming back up to speed. And then there's the but, okay? So I've got to say that we all know that there are challenges with in-room events, and if you compare them to virtual events, they are inevitably more costly. There are lots more people involved. There's a lot more hardware involved. There's venues, there's catering, there's logistics. They are always going to be more expensive. we've got to accept that. And right now, those costs are going up. I think the figure that I got from a recent ICE survey was 30% increase across the board on physical events from pre-COVID, and we're looking at staffing issues, we're looking at technology issues, there's a lack of AV technicians, there's lots of factors that are driving costs up. There's the time issue. So a physical event takes time to organize. It takes time in the planning phase, it takes time in the doing phase, the execution, that's you as an individual planner, that's individuals that are attending, that's individuals that are speaking, so it has a higher cost time boundary. There's risk with physical events. I'm not saying there's not risk with virtual events, but there are risks with physical events related to logistics, related to weather, related to transport, and all of those factors. So these are challenges. And then there's your capacity as an individual. How many physical events can you as an individual planner bring up, organize, maintain, bring down, and continue in the course of a year? You have a max capacity as an individual. Your team has a max capacity. That's a fact of life. Unless you can replicate yourself, there's always a capacity issue. So all of those things mean that whilst in-person events are awesome and we've got to run them and we will continue to run them and they deliver results, there are gaps being created where virtual events can still sit. So when I start talking about hybrid now, I don't just talk about hybrid events. I talk about a hybrid events portfolio. And that's from the perspective of an events organizer, but also the perspective of as an attendee. So as an events organizer, it's thinking about, well, actually a large number of my events could be run in person. In between that, some of those might be hybrid. They might be high-value events where I want to be doing live streaming or I want to be recording and making that available afterwards. And some events can be virtual. Maybe they work better virtual. And I'm building up a portfolio as an event organizer that reflects that. This is actually our Glisser's own hybrid portfolio of this year. So we've attended or run our own in-person events 12 times this year. So at a cadence of roughly once a month, something like this. So this we're counting this one. In fact, actually, I think we're counting this one as a hybrid. So, but regular in-person only. We've run or participated in 4 hybrid events this year. So you're looking at really an in-person event every month, a hybrid event every quarter, and we've done about 20 virtual events or participated in other people's virtual events in between. So by the end of the year, that's probably about 24. So you're looking at a cadence which is roughly twice a month for virtual, once a month for in-person, and once a quarter for hybrid. And that works for our business. And we've created this hybrid portfolio that does different things and different activities for our business. I also look at hybrid in terms of attendees. So I'm going to do this with a show of hands. How many of you have attended a virtual event in 2022? So probably about 75–80% of you are still attending virtual events. How many of you have attended a hybrid event? It should be everyone. You're at one right now. And how many of you attended a pure play physical event with no hybrid element at all, no virtual element at all? Okay, so you as individuals are taking choices to say, this event I want to attend in person, this event I want to attend virtually. In the case of a hybrid, you've got a choice. And you're building your event attendance around your lifestyle preferences, about the situation you have at home, your willingness to travel, your considerations for the environment. So as attendees, we're starting to build our own portfolios that have a slightly different weighting than perhaps they did pre-COVID. So that's the way that we see the market moving, and ultimately your selection of the best media, the best approach, will be governed by your attendees and what they want to do. So in finding a place for virtual events in this new landscape, and why do we still continue to do them as a company ourselves? I've tried to identify the kind of main areas where I think that virtual events still have a place to play in between your physical events. So run your physical events regularly, but there are gaps in there where I think that virtual events can really add some value. First and foremost, I think, and certainly for us, is that virtual events can be spun up really, really fast. When I was an event planner, we're usually starting to plan events, and some of my events that I run won't be on the scale of you guys, but we were probably planning things about 3 months in advance. And then we were probably looking to send out initial marketing 6 weeks to a month in advance to start getting delegates. That was kind of our timing. And then you'd probably be closing down a couple of weeks after the event took place. So you kind of got a 3.5 month program for each event. And obviously you could overlap them and squeeze more in, but that was the typical sort of cadence that we were able to run them. Which is fine, because that's what you need to get the logistics in place, to get the people in place, to get it book into people's diaries. With virtual events, you can spin these things up in days. You know, you can get something set up, you can get a topic, you can find speakers, you can send out invites, and if people have room in their calendar, they're joining your event in a day's time or later that day. So that's a different tool that you have in your armory to sort of infill and deliver those events which are perhaps more relevant to really current topics. So, for example, something happens in your industry that's a new piece of legislation, or something happens in the government, or a competitor launches a new product, or whatever it might be. You can, with a virtual event, you can get that instant response, spin it up very quickly, and get onto those trending topics and start offering an opinion and creating an event around it. So the speed of execution of virtual events makes them ideal to slot in those gaps between your physical events. So again, we're saying you're not replacing physical events, you're just finding opportunities to slot these in as extras. The second thing with a virtual event that sort of separates it from a physical event is that you're able to really target in on niche audiences where you might feel that a physical event isn't worth it or isn't worth the risk. So if you've got a very, very large-scale event like this, you can start to create separate speaking areas, different topic areas and so on within here, and we can dive into topics. But it may be that if you're running an event, a topic area is perhaps too niche that you can't dedicate a slot to it. It's not going to fill a room. There might be 10 people that are super interested in that topic, but it's not enough to warrant taking up the time and space to deliver it. The great thing with virtual is that you really don't have a limit on the space that you have, the bums on seats. It kind of doesn't matter in virtual how many people are in the room. You know, I know as a speaker here, when we're waiting 5 minutes before the event starts, we're terrified that no one's actually going to sit down and we're going to be talking to an empty room. And once you start and you're talking to an empty room, no one wants to sit down in that empty room, and it's just horrible. And as an event planner, you look at that and go, oh, that was a bad decision. Did I get the right speaker? Was the topic right? In a virtual environment, it kind of doesn't matter, because you can set it so that nobody knows how many are in there. And if one person is attending and they're getting absolutely the right knowledge they want and they're loving it and that delivers for you, that's fine. That event worked. So there's kind of an opportunity to go into really niche areas without any fear of them failing, because you're running it in a virtual sense. And you can really dive into those expert niche areas. You can gather data, manage them, and monitor how effective they are. And finally, penultimately, this is an area that I think is really important. And this applies equally to hybrid events as it does virtual events. And that is about the content being repurposed. So one of the huge advantages of capturing something on video and capturing the audio is that we can reuse that content again and again. So say the worst came to the worst and nobody turned up for this session here. I've got 2 cameras pointing at me because this is a hybrid event. This is being recorded. I'm getting the content off the back of it. I can repurpose that video. So I can cut it down. I think one of the previous speakers was talking about 6 minutes of video, 90 seconds of video, 6 seconds of video now, reformatting it for different social media types and using this content again and again to drive leads or to use in advertising campaigns. So one of the great and powerful things about doing a virtual or a hybrid event is the amount of video content that you're able to capture that can then be reused really easily. You're kind of creating marketing and communications content as you go along. Once you've captured it on video, you can just run it through a free transcribe solution, which will turn it into written format. Then it's really easy to turn it into a blog post, to turn it into an intranet post, to turn it into an ebook, to turn it into other forms of content. So the great thing about capturing events virtually is it's a very easy way to generate further marketing materials, further communications materials. And if you're running your events and inviting speakers, you're capturing this rich information from many different speakers as well. So virtual and hybrid gives you really recreatable content that can be used again and again. And then the final reason or final area that you might use virtual between your physical events, or virtual hybrid between your physical events, is around building communities. So communities has been a bit of a buzzword around events for the last couple of years. It's about sort of not just losing people at the door. The moment they step outside your event, they forget about you for the next year or for the next half year. It's trying to maintain that interest, trying to maintain that dialogue, trying to maintain those connections between people that maybe genuinely networked at your event, and you want to retain their connection throughout the year or between the physical events that you run. Clearly, virtual has a place to play to sort of create those additional touch points, to get those people back in a virtual room again, to connect, to reconnect with your brand, to reconnect with some of your topics, to crowdsource topics for your next physical event. So by using these kind of, I guess, lower cost touch points in between, we're able to do that. Does virtual work? Again, I'm just going to, it will work for some people, it won't work for others, but I'm going to give you, this is genuine data from my business. We monitor our 5 channels of marketing that we do. And 2 of those are related to events. One is physical events that we do, and one is virtual events. We do email, digital advertising, and kind of outbound sales teams as well. So these are the 5 channels. We see how much we spend on them. We spend the least on virtual events, actually. We have one advantage. We get to use our own platform for free, so we don't have to buy a license off of ourselves. So if we did, we still would probably spend the least on virtual events, okay? But by and large, compared to everything else, it's cheaper. Physical events are second. As I said, we don't do a huge amount, but we do invest in them. We invest the time, we invest the people, we invest in the sponsorship, we invest in being a stage sponsor, getting a speaking slot, all of those things that we want to do. And I guess this is talking from a marketing perspective on our events. We look at how many opportunities we generate from each of those platforms. Right now, this was done at this half year. Actually, events kind of underperforming. Physical events actually really work, but they work more slowly. So if you monitor really quickly, we find that physical events probably come in a bad place. If you actually look further down the line and you sort of look at the attribution of the leads that we get, you start to see people that we met at events 3 years ago, and then it starts driving through. So that's just a kind of, just to offset that point. But relatively speaking, our cost per lead or cost per opportunity is really low for events. I would caveat that again with the point that I made earlier, that while our cost per lead from a physical event is relatively high, they tend to be genuinely high quality leads and they convert well. So, and finally, our ROI. So we're sort of making these calculations and we're constantly comparing what we're doing from a virtual event perspective and a physical event perspective and making sure that they're all cost effective for our business. So we've taken the view that there's a place for both of them. We want to do physical events, they really bring us value, but we see slots where we can squeeze in those virtual events and keep those things going through the year. Do them quickly, really zone in on niche topics, do them in a way that kind of creates a community, and so on. So there must be a catch, right? I said at the start, you can't. The saying is actually, you can't have your cake and eat it. You can't have 2 good things. You can't have a cake that you want to eat and be eating it at the same time. So there must be a catch. And the catch, again, comes down to your capacity as an event planner. Because kind of what we're saying here is, you've got to try and squeeze, you're now not removing physical events. Those physical events, you can still run them. If they're working for you, you're running them. What we're kind of asking you to do is say, hey, find some more capacity, squeeze in those extra virtual events in between, because it's delivering this, or it creates a community, or it's giving you some a different angle or a niche topic. And that's really hard. What I would say is that some analysis that I got from the ICE, so this is Anita at the ICE, she told me this about a month ago, 1/3 of organizations, and she primarily works with large enterprises, 1/3 of them now have a specialist role that is a digital, virtual, hybrid event planner. So they've separated out a new role and said, this is permanent, this isn't just a COVID thing, this isn't just us, pivoting into this for a period of time, but they see a genuine permanent role for somebody who's responsible for digital events or the digital component of hybrid events, so that somebody's responsible for that. Someone's looking after it. Someone's taking ownership. Someone's focused on that so that the original event planners can focus on the physical event. So an argument there would be, if you feel that anything I've said today is relevant, you should be looking in your organization and maybe seeing whether there's a head to be hired there, whether you can get head count, and making the claim for somebody to be totally focused on the digital part of your events. And that could include virtual events and hybrid events, but it could also be looking at your badging and all of the other event tech that you've always been doing, but making them solely focused on it so you actually free yourself up if digital isn't something that you want to do. The other option is, of course, to select a provider which has the capacity, has the resources, has the willingness to help you and go a bit further rather than just flogging you software, but will actually have people on site if you need them, support you virtually if you need them, and making sure that they can be that missing extra body that you can have if you can't hire that head. So before I go on to any questions, a couple of points on optimizing for virtual, just some takeaways really. When I spoke to different results that you can get from virtual. I think it's really important that you're matching how you design your sessions and the things that you do and the way that you're running them and the style and the length of the content and the amount of slides and whether it's a panel or whether it's a presenter and how much interaction you have has to be about delivering on your objective. So think about your objective. Are you trying to raise awareness? Are you informing people? Are you sharing information? Secondly, and I would advocate this for in-room, I'd advocate this for hybrid, interactivity is your easiest form for getting data. Getting people tapping things on screens, connecting, interacting, answering questions, voting in polls, quizzing, answering surveys, all the tricks that we have, that gives you engagement data. That allows you to analyze and make ROI judgments. And the point I made earlier, repurpose, repurpose, repurpose. If you're doing anything digital, do not stop at completing the event. Use it again, get somebody to edit videos, cut them down, turn them into social media posts, work with your marketing teams to understand how they could use those assets you've caught and making sure that they're valuable. So that's the end of my session. I'm now going to go over to questions. Before I go on to the Glisser questions, anyone in the room? I think we've got a spare roving mic if anyone has a hand up question.
You talked at a point about communities and having those, platform open all year long and different events on it. How do you, what's the frequency of those events compared to what you will do to manage the community to keep them engaged between those events?
Yeah, I think that's interesting. So I think when we think about communities, we think about that you have an opportunity to either do synchronous activity or asynchronous activity. So what I mean by that is synchronous activity is a live event where you're trying to get that community back together at a point in time in your event so that there is interaction to be had between the people. You also have the opportunity with a community-style platform is to run asynchronous activities, and that might be something more like video on demand or white papers or anything that they can come into and browse at their leisure, consume at their leisure, download. And in that environment, you're less trying to make connections between the individuals because they're not all attending at the same time. So when you're answering that question, I like to think about it in both ways, in that you should always be producing more and more regular asynchronous content because it's just a reason for them to come back and another hit on your site and another email opportunity to reach out to them. And I always feel with emails when you're sending them out to a community or any audience, as long as you're adding value in every email you send, they're going to accept that email and not delete you from their records and keep engaged. So if you're saying, hey, we've got a new piece of content, it's about this in our community area, they might not want to read it now, they might not want to read it at all, but if they think, hey, that's a reasonable email, they can ignore it, and that's fine. So you're building up that constant flow of asynchronous content. For the synchronous stuff, I think a worthwhile way of looking at it is how many physical in-room events are you running? So how often are you getting that community together? And how often in between that do you need to be running something live in order to maintain some sort of dialogue or trying to get them back together? So in our example, we're saying we're running a physical event of some sort monthly, and we are putting 2 virtuals in between, because if effectively you've got 2 virtuals a month as well. So you're effectively running 3 events a month, one of which is in room and 2 are virtual. Now I must put my hands up and say the physical events we're often attending as part of somebody else's event, so we're not necessarily running all of those ourselves, so you count those as well. And in some cases we're not necessarily running the virtual event, so actually within a time period we might be running one virtual event of our own and working with somebody else on. But with that community, it's about filling those gaps, and probably in that scenario, if you're running a physical event monthly, once in between would be absolutely fine, maybe even more. If you're running an event quarterly, I'd probably be putting a couple of touch points in, so filling in those month gaps with a reason to connect together. So, the first virtual event after a physical event would be perhaps a refresh on what took place at the virtual event. You'd get a lot of content from that, maybe talk about what went well, what went wrong, and so on, and maybe maintaining the dialogue. And by the time you get to the second virtual event, you're starting to talk about the next physical event which is upcoming. So which topic areas do you want to cover? Where should we hold it? How many do you want network? You can start to create this sense that you're building up to that peak again. I always consider the physical events as the peaks, and you're just trying to keep the trough between those peaks as least trough-like as possible by sort of giving these touch points, if you see what I mean. Okay, I've got 5 minutes. So any others in the room? Okay, let me go through these. Will hybrid still be popular with a possible higher cost of virtual or in-person only? I would say the cost of virtual is coming down. There are 350 suppliers now, about probably 50 of them here. That's competitive. Pricing's definitely coming down. Certainly companies are having to innovate and do more to keep business. So I think the virtual component is coming down, but I recognize that the physical component is going up, and we hear it a lot. I think that's slower to unfold. With the staffing, people leaving the hospitality industry, that's something to bear in mind. And I think it should be, I think you've got to think about that, and that might, you've got to weigh that up. Again, we're advocates for that, but you've got to make sure that when you run those events, they're really effective. And actually, I think hybrid is a really nice format for that, because you're running that physical event and the costs associated with it, but for a marginal increase in the price, which is adding in a virtual platform, some camera crews, or some PTX cameras, you're getting a lot more content, and that content can be repurposed. So I think hybrid is actually a means of saving money overall on a per head basis across in the face of rising costs. Communities are about co-creation. How can you realize this element virtually? I think that if you're doing these smaller community type events, a lot more of the sessions can be web conference sessions. So online, I'm sure you know, but you can have a broadcast session where it's just a speaker presenting, everyone else on mute, not even with cameras on. Or you can run web conference sessions. So obviously with smaller virtual sessions, running them as web conferences allow a lot more audience participation through audio, through discussion, through breakout rooms. And I think for those things, you can definitely recreate that idea and that idea of co-creation, particularly if you're using those sessions to plan for the physical event. Can we monetize virtual events, or will there be a lead generation tool in a freemium model? So I think monetization of virtual events through attendees is more challenging than monetization through sponsors. So I think sponsors allow you to monetize virtual events. I think that they also allow you to monetize hybrid events. I think as a sponsor, we're a sponsor here. We look at it collectively. We look at booth traffic to our stand, number of quality leads, but we're also monitoring the virtual platforms. We're looking at how that's effective for us. How is our brand presented there? So sponsors will weigh up the package that you offer them. And if that package includes virtual components, then they're going to make a judgment call on whether that's good value for money. And if it's good value for money, they'll be willing to pay for it. I would say that the mindset on the virtual component doesn't need to be just the same as it is in the in-room component. So in room, you're looking at how big's my logo, where is it, where's my booth on the floor, when's my speaking slot, am I on the main stage or am I on a tiny stage at the back? All of that. So those things matter. But in virtual, you can kind of look at it slightly differently. It's am I able to use virtual to give my sponsors really rich data on the thoughts that my audience is having? Can I package up a data pack from my event and sell that to my sponsors? As I said, I don't think networking really works, so I've not seen a load of effectiveness from selling sponsors kind of virtual booths and saying, hey, put a virtual person on a virtual booth and hope somebody turns up. I think far better to sell sponsors speaking opportunities, opportunities to impart knowledge. Again, it doesn't matter. You can sell as many of those as you want because you don't have to worry about, do I have room space? Where do they fit in the diary? So selling up a package where a sponsor is able to invite a small and niche audience and really get high quality leads may be the way forward. So I think monetization of virtual is through sponsorship rather than event attendance, because I think, personally, I think it's really tough to sell a virtual experience to an attendee. There's so much content online now, so much available, so much on demand. What you might be able to do is, and I'm for Sean's time, you might be able to put it behind a membership area. So you're packaging up all of that digital content, all those recorded videos, and selling it as part of a broader package for a membership or a premium experience. So there are other ways around that. But I'm out of time, so I can speak to that afterwards if anyone has any questions. That's me. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for sitting patiently. Bye.